January 26, 1945. The town of Holtzwihr, France, sat buried under snow as 6 German panzer tanks rumbled toward the American positions. Lieutenant Audie Murphy watched from his command post as the lead tank's gun swiveled toward his men. Then the first shell hit. The M10 tank destroyer erupted in flames. Murphy's company scattered as German infantry poured out of the woods behind the advancing armor. 250 German soldiers against Murphy's remaining force of 18 men, most of them green replacements who had never seen combat. Murphy ordered his men to fall back to the tree line 300 yards behind them. Every one of them obeyed. Everyone except Murphy himself. The 19-year-old lieutenant walked alone across the frozen field toward the burning tank destroyer. Machine gun fire kicked up snow around his boots. Artillery shells screamed overhead. The tank destroyer's ammunition was cooking off, sending rounds exploding in every direction. Murphy climbed onto the burning vehicle, grabbed the .50 caliber machine gun mounted on top, and swung it toward the advancing German infantry. What happened next would defy every military expert's understanding of what one human being could accomplish under fire. But then, the experts had been wrong about Audie Murphy from the very beginning. 3 years earlier, on the day after Pearl Harbor, a 17-year-old kid from rural Texas walked into a Marine Corps recruiting office with determination burning in his eyes. The recruiter took one look at him and burst out laughing. Audie Murphy stood 5 feet 5 inches tall and weighed exactly 112 pounds. He looked more like a high school freshman than a warrior. The Marine recruiter didn't even bother with the physical examination. "Come back when you grow up, son." Murphy tried the Army paratroopers next. Same result. Too small, too light. Next. The Navy turned him away without a second glance. "We need sailors, not children." But Murphy refused to quit. He'd grown up dirt poor in Texas during the Depression, one of 12 children in a sharecropper family. His father had abandoned them. His mother died when Murphy was 16. He'd kept his younger siblings alive by hunting, trapping, and picking cotton. He'd learned young that you don't stop just because something's hard. Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what you know about Audie Murphy. Drop a comment below and let me know if you'd heard this story before. And if you appreciate this level of historical detail, I hope you'll subscribe to the channel. These stories take serious research to get the details right, and knowing you're out there makes it all worthwhile. War wasn't an adventure to Murphy. It was a job that needed doing. So when the regular army finally accepted him in June 1942, he knew it was only because his older sister Corinne had forged documents saying he was 18 instead of 17. The drill instructors at Camp Walters, Texas, took one look at the baby-faced recruit and assumed he'd wash out within a week. During bayonet training, larger soldiers knocked him down repeatedly. On the obstacle course, he struggled to climb walls his longer-limbed comrades scaled easily. "That boy's gonna get himself killed," one sergeant told another. "He's got heart, but heart don't stop bullets. Send him to cook school or something." Murphy shipped out with the 3rd Infantry Division in February 1943. The veteran soldiers made bets on how long the 112-pound teenager would last in combat. Most gave him less than a week. They were catastrophically wrong. Murphy's first combat came during the invasion of Sicily in July 1943. While other soldiers hugged the ground under German machine gun fire, Murphy low-crawled forward alone, flanked a stone farmhouse, and killed 2 German soldiers with his M1 carbine, before the rest even knew he was inside. His company commander stared at the skinny teenager standing amid 4 dead Germans. "Murphy, what the hell were you thinking?" "They were in our way, sir." This pattern repeated itself across Sicily, Italy, and into France. Murphy's small size became an advantage. He could slip through terrain larger men couldn't navigate. His childhood hunting made him a deadly shot. His poverty-forged toughness meant he could endure conditions that broke other men. By January 1945, Murphy had earned a battlefield commission to second lieutenant. He'd been wounded 3 times. The third wound, in October 1944, nearly killed him. A sniper's bullet tore through his hip. The wound developed gangrene, and Murphy spent months in a hospital fighting the infection, while doctors debated amputation. They finally cleared him to return to duty in mid-January 1945. Murphy rejoined Company B just 12 days before the battle at Holtzwihr. He was still limping from the hip wound. Any reasonable officer would have taken more time to recover. Murphy wasn't reasonable. His men needed him, and he'd never walked away from a job that needed doing. The sergeants who'd laughed at him in basic training were now saluting him. But his biggest test was still ahead. Murphy's company had been reduced to 18 men by the time they reached the frozen woods outside Holtzwihr. Most of the veterans were dead. The replacements were teenagers who'd never heard a shot fired in anger. On January 26th at dawn, the German attack came. 6 Panzer tanks emerged from the morning fog with 250 infantry advancing behind them. Murphy called for artillery support and ordered his tank destroyers forward. The first M10 took a direct hit from a German Panzer. Flames engulfed the vehicle as the crew scrambled out. Murphy's second tank destroyer reversed rapidly, but German infantry had already flanked the American positions. Murphy's 40 men were about to be surrounded and annihilated. The radio operator's face went white. "Lieutenant, we gotta pull back. There's too many of them." Murphy made the decision that would define his entire life. "Everyone fall back to the tree line. Artillery observer stays with me." His men didn't want to leave him, but Murphy made it an order. As his company retreated toward the woods, Murphy walked forward through machine gun fire toward the burning tank destroyer. The burning tank destroyer sat in the middle of an open field with no cover for 300 yards in any direction. German machine gun fire swept across the frozen ground. The tank destroyer's ammunition was cooking off, sending rounds exploding in random directions. Murphy climbed onto the vehicle. Flames licked up from the engine compartment. The metal deck was hot enough to burn through boot soles. Smoke poured from every opening. Standing on top of this burning ammunition dump, Murphy grabbed the M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun and swung it toward the advancing Germans. The first burst cut down 3 German soldiers. Murphy adjusted his aim and fired again, killing 4 more. The Germans had assumed the burning tank destroyer was abandoned. Suddenly, it had become a deadly fortress with a lone defender who refused to die. Bullets sparked off the tank destroyer's armor. Rounds whistled past Murphy's head. An artillery shell landed 10 yards away, showering him with frozen dirt and shrapnel. Murphy kept firing. This is where something impossible began to happen. Murphy's small size, the very thing that had gotten him rejected by every military branch, suddenly became a devastating advantage. On top of that tank destroyer, he presented a smaller target than a larger man would have. His years of hunting had taught him to track multiple targets simultaneously. His poverty-forged toughness meant he could ignore the flames burning his feet and the smoke choking his lungs. But it was more than physical advantages. Murphy had spent his entire life being underestimated. Every drill instructor who'd predicted he'd fail. Every soldier who'd bet he wouldn't last a week. Every German who'd looked at the baby-faced lieutenant and assumed he'd break easily. Murphy had built a career proving people wrong. The Germans tried flanking maneuvers. Murphy spotted them and called down artillery fire through the field radio, directing strikes within 50 yards of his own position. They tried massing for a direct assault. Murphy's .50 caliber cut them down in groups. They tried having tanks target him specifically. Murphy kept firing even as panzer shells exploded around the burning vehicle. For 1 hour, Audie Murphy stood on that burning tank destroyer and held off an entire German company by himself. Then Murphy felt the impact in his right leg. A German machine gun burst had found its mark. Blood soaked through his pants. The leg buckled slightly, but Murphy locked his knee and kept firing. The ammunition belt feeding the .50 caliber was running dry. Murphy fired the last rounds in controlled bursts, making every bullet count. When the gun finally went silent, he'd been on top of that burning tank destroyer for over an hour. The German attack had stalled. Bodies littered the field. Witnesses later counted over 40 dead Germans in the immediate vicinity, with total casualties exceeding 50 killed or wounded. One man, armed with one machine gun, had stopped an attack by 6 tanks and 250 infantry. Murphy climbed down from the tank destroyer. His right leg nearly collapsed under him. The artillery observer stared at Murphy like he was seeing a ghost. "Lieutenant, you're hit." "I noticed." Murphy limped 300 yards back to his company's position. His men emerged from cover, several crying openly at seeing him alive. Instead of seeking medical attention, Murphy organized his men for a counterattack. Despite his wounded leg, despite the burns on his feet, despite having just survived an hour of combat that should have killed him 10 times over, Murphy led his 18 men forward and drove the remaining Germans out of Holzwihr. Only after securing the objective did Murphy allow a medic to examine his leg wound. He'd been standing on that burning tank destroyer for 20 minutes with a bullet hole through his calf, and nobody had known because Murphy hadn't stopped fighting. The official after-action reports from Holzwihr read like fiction. Officers reviewing Murphy's citation for the Medal of Honor initially questioned whether the accounts were exaggerated. One man, on top of a burning vehicle, holding off 250 German soldiers and 6 tanks for an hour. It defied military doctrine and common sense. But there were 18 American witnesses and captured German soldiers who confirmed every detail. Some of the German prisoners asked to meet the officer who'd stopped their attack. When they saw the slight, baby-faced lieutenant, several refused to believe it. They'd assumed they'd been facing a reinforced company with heavy weapons, not one teenager with a machine gun. The Medal of Honor was presented to Murphy by Lieutenant General Alexander Patch on June 2, 1945, near Salzburg, Austria. But the Medal of Honor was just the beginning. By the war's end, Murphy had received every combat decoration the United States could award. France awarded him the Legion of Honor. Belgium gave him the Belgian Croix de Guerre. In total, Audie Murphy received 33 awards and medals, making him the most decorated American combat soldier of World War II. The teenager who'd been too small to enlist had become a one-man wrecking crew who'd killed an estimated 240 German soldiers across 2 years of continuous combat. He'd been wounded 3 times. He'd fought in 9 major campaigns across North Africa, Sicily, Italy, France, and Germany. At age 21, when the war ended, Murphy was already a legend. After the war, Murphy's story caught Hollywood's attention. Actor James Cagney saw Murphy's picture on the cover of Life magazine and invited him to California. Murphy's film career culminated in 1955 when he starred in To Hell and Back, playing himself. The movie became Universal's highest-grossing film until Jaws 20 years later. But fame couldn't silence the nightmares. Murphy suffered from severe post-traumatic stress disorder, though in the 1940s, nobody had a name for it. He slept with a loaded .45 pistol under his pillow. He had violent nightmares. What made Murphy's struggle particularly cruel was that America wanted its heroes to be invulnerable. Murphy became an advocate for better treatment of veterans' psychological wounds, speaking openly about his struggles when nobody else would. On May 28, 1971, Murphy died in a plane crash in Virginia at age 45. The man who'd survived being shot 3 times, who'd stood on a burning tank destroyer against an entire German company, who'd walked through 2 years of the deadliest war in human history, had died in a random accident. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. His gravesite became one of the most visited at Arlington, second only to President Kennedy's. Today, veterans stop by Murphy's grave to salute. Tourists bring their children to tell them about the boy who was too small to fight, but became the most decorated soldier in American history. The stone is simple: his name, his rank, and his dates. It doesn't list his 33 medals. It doesn't need to. The military establishment that laughed at Murphy in 1942 studied his tactics for decades afterward. His one-man stand at Holtzwihr became required reading at officer training schools. Not because it should be replicated, the Army was careful to note that Murphy's actions were extraordinarily reckless, but because it demonstrated what's possible when courage, skill, and absolute refusal to surrender combine in a single person. Murphy's story has become mythology, but the facts are more powerful than any myth. A 112-pound teenager who was rejected by every military branch. A soldier who forged documents just to serve. A lieutenant who stood alone on a burning tank destroyer for an hour and stopped an entire German company. But Murphy's greatest legacy might be what he represented to everyone who's been underestimated based on their appearance. Every short kid who was told they couldn't compete. Every thin teenager who was told they weren't tough enough. Every person from poverty who was told their background would prevent success. Murphy proved that what matters isn't what other people think you can do. What matters is what you refuse to stop trying to accomplish. The recruiters were wrong. The drill instructors were wrong. The soldiers who bet Murphy wouldn't last a week in combat were catastrophically wrong. The German forces at Holtzwihr, who assumed the small American lieutenant would break, easily learned their error at a cost of 50 casualties. Audie Murphy spent his entire life being told he was too small to matter. He responded by mattering more than almost anyone else of his generation. That's not just a war story. That's a lesson that never gets old. The people who get rejected the hardest often become the ones who change history. Murphy's grave reminds us that true heroism has nothing to do with size. The man everyone said was too weak to fight became the soldier who wouldn't stop.